I never anticipated that a routine lift from the groundskeeper would evolve into one of the most pivotal experiences of my later years. I had simply hoped for a quick ride back from the far edge of the estate, a place where the orchards had become as much a fixture of my daily life as my morning tea. But Thomas, the man who tended the grounds, possessed a demeanor that caught me completely off guard, a presence that commanded attention not by asking for it, but by simply being. That afternoon, he demonstrated a kind of strength that redefined the word for me. It wasn't just physical power, it was something deeper, warmer, and far more personal than I could have ever predicted. Before we continue with the story, please remember to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which city you are listening from. Your support means the world to us. And now, let's begin. I had spent the better part of the morning wandering through the rows of blooming peonies and wisteria, my gloves stained with earth and my cardigan catching stray petals. The sun had climbed high, turning fierce and bright, and even with my experience, I felt the heat seeping heavily into my tired limbs. Earlier, I had asked Thomas if he might drive me back to the main house when he finished his rounds. I viewed it as a simple exchange. I would hop into his truck. We would make small talk about the lack of rain, and I would hop out at the driveway. I had no idea that this mundane request would unravel into a memory that would linger in my mind for days to come. Thomas pulled up exactly when he said he would. He carried a stillness about him, a steadying energy that seemed to bring order to the chaos of the day. He offered a small smile as I approached, dusting his hands on his canvas work pants. There was an effortless comfort about him, a quality you don't always expect from someone whose job is technically to battle the elements and tame nature. "All set, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, calm and grounded. There was no pretense in his tone, just the quiet confidence of a man who takes pride in his work. "Yes," I answered, adjusting the strap of my bag. "I'm ready." As I climbed into the passenger seat of his weathered pickup, a subtle tension of sudden proximity began to rise. It wasn't uncomfortable, rather, it made me hyper, aware of the heat radiating from him. The cab of the truck smelled of pine needles and old leather, a scent so earthy and real it felt like it could ground you instantly. We drove in silence for the first few minutes, the only sounds being the tires on gravel and the rhythmic hum of the engine. I watched Thomas navigate the winding service road with a casual skill that spoke of years behind the wheel. Through the rolled-up sleeves of his plaid shirt, I could see the natural definition of his arms as he turned the wheel. I realized then, with a spark of admiration, that his strength was obvious physically, but it was his manner that truly struck me. He was attuned to the world around him without feeling the need to conquer it. I found myself talking, almost involuntarily, about my morning among the blossoms, about how the light caught the dew on the leaves, and how the scent of the soil reminded me of the garden my father kept when I was a girl. Thomas listened, truly listened. He nodded at the right times, his eyes focused on the path ahead, yet his attention felt entirely fixed on me. It was a quiet focus, wrapping around me like a warm shawl. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The truck hit a rut in the dirt road, and I jolted sideways, my hand instinctively grabbing his forearm to steady myself. His arm didn't flinch. He kept the wheel steady, but he didn't pull away either. He let the moment hang in the air, a pause that made my pulse quicken for reasons I couldn't articulate. He didn't make a joke or try to charm me. He simply held the space, a subtle fortitude that felt both physical and emotional. A warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the midday heat. I began to notice details I had previously overlooked: the capability in his hands, the serenity in his gaze, the way he moved through life with an unhurried assurance. There was undeniable power there, but it wasn't loud. It was protective, reassuring, and completely modest. As the drive went on, our conversation flowed into other things: the changing seasons, the history of the town, my favorite spots by the river, but the undercurrent had changed. There was no rush to fill the silence, just a mutual understanding that sharing this space was enough. By the time we reached the main house, I felt a strange reluctance to open the door and step out. It seemed ridiculous, it was just a 10-minute ride, but the way Thomas carried himself, that radiation of quiet stability, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't been in a very long time. I realized then that strength isn't always about force. It can be gentle, patient, and profoundly safe. What started as a favor had transformed into a revelation about connection and the unexpected ways people can impact us. Over the next few days, my mind kept drifting back to that short journey. It wasn't just the physical closeness, it was the way Thomas made the world feel slower, more manageable, allowing me to breathe deeply again. I found myself glancing at the calendar, hoping our paths would cross while he was tending the hedges. That Saturday, I decided to bridge the gap. I invited him in, not for anything grand, just a cup of coffee and a break from the heat. I wanted to see if that grounded presence felt the same inside these walls, to see if that first spark was just a fluke. When he walked into the kitchen, I noticed how he seemed to occupy the space without overwhelming it. Thomas didn't fidget. He offered a relaxed smile, his hands still carrying the dust of the morning, his eyes brightening when they met mine. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "you didn't have to trouble yourself. I was hoping to see you." I paused, surprised by his candor, and he chuckled, a deep, rich sound that made the large room feel cozy. "I guess I was hoping for the same," I admitted. We sat in the sunroom with our coffee. The afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains, painting soft stripes across the table. For the first time in years, I felt completely at ease sharing silence with another person. Thomas was easy to be with, yet his presence made me hyper, aware of the smallest things, the way he held his mug, the way he looked out at the garden he cared for so diligently. We talked about life, about the land, about the past. I found myself opening up, telling him about my late husband, about the loneliness that sometimes crept into the evenings, and about my love for this property. Thomas listened with that same intensity, never interrupting, never looking at his watch. I felt heard. It stirred something in me, a dormant feeling of validation. Then it happened again. I reached for the cream pitcher at the same moment he did. Our fingers brushed, a fleeting, accidental touch that seemed to charge the air between us. Thomas looked up, his expression calm but alert, as if he felt the current too. He didn't pull back immediately. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the connection without forcing it into words. That was when I saw the strength in him again. It wasn't about the muscles used for digging or hauling. It was the strength of restraint, of respecting boundaries while still being entirely present. He possessed an emotional fortitude that made me feel safe and cherished all at once. After coffee, we wandered outside. Thomas crouched down to inspect a bed of lilies I had been fighting to keep alive. I watched him work, admiring the precision in his fingers, the way he handled the delicate stems with absolute care. On a whim, I asked for help moving a heavy stone planter I had given up on weeks ago. He smiled, a knowing, gentle look, and lifted it with a smooth, effortless motion. I felt a mix of awe and relief. It wasn't just that he could lift it, it was the assurance that he could handle the heavy things. There was security in knowing he was capable and dependable. It stirred a sense of trust that went beyond the physical task. We spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side, trading stories and laughing at our small mistakes. With every passing hour, I felt more tethered to him, more aware of the layers of his character, his humor, his patience, his unwavering calm. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows of gold and amber, Thomas stood up and wiped his brow. "You know," he said softly, "I'm enjoying this, just being here, talking. It feels right." I smiled, feeling a glow that the setting sun couldn't take credit for. "I feel the same," I whispered. "It's rare to be this comfortable with someone." He nodded, and for a moment we just looked at each other, surrounded by the rustling leaves. The connection had deepened. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was respect, trust, and a quiet thrill. I knew this was just the beginning of a journey neither of us had mapped out, but both were willing to walk. The day ended with a sense of fulfillment. I realized that the strongest people aren't the loudest. They are the ones who show up, who hold space, and who make you feel understood. Thomas was exactly that kind of strong. The days following our afternoon in the garden felt different. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. Even small interactions, a text about the weather, a wave from across the lawn, seemed to carry weight. I found myself looking forward to seeing him, not just for the help, but for the peace he brought with him. One crisp morning, I was out early checking the trellis, secretly hoping he would appear, and he did, walking around the bend with that easy stride. "Good morning, Eleanor," he called out, his voice warming the cool air. "Good morning, Thomas," I replied, feeling a little breathlessness that made me feel foolish and alive all at once. "Just checking the vines." He joined me, and we fell into step together. The garden was waking up, filled with the scent of damp earth and new blooms. Suddenly, I found myself wrestling with a thick, overgrown branch of ivy. I tugged at it, realizing my determination wasn't enough to match the stubborn plant. Thomas was there instantly. He didn't push me aside, he stepped in to support. With gentle power, he guided the branch exactly where it needed to go. "Here," he said softly. "Let me take the weight." "Thank you," I said, looking up at him. "You don't have to struggle alone, Eleanor." he replied, his eyes sincere. Things are easier with two. There it was again. The strength that wasn't about showing off, but about being there. I felt a swell of gratitude and something else, a sense of being truly supported. We worked in companionable silence, the sun rising higher. I watched his hands steady and deliberate. He treated the plants and me with such care. At one point, we leaned on our tools to catch our breath. The silence was charged now, humming with unspoken things. I felt a flutter of nervous excitement, surprising for a woman of 66. Yet here I was, feeling the pull of a man whose quiet intensity was unlike anything I had known. Thomas looked at me, his gaze holding a mix of acknowledgement and restraint. He wasn't bold, but the intensity in his eyes made my heart skip. We both knew this was more than a casual friendship. Later, as we trimmed a small ornamental tree, I stepped back and nearly lost my footing on a loose stone. Thomas's hand was there in a flash, gripping my arm to steady me. His touch was firm but gentle, a reminder that strength could be both an anchor and a cushion. Careful, I breathed, aware of the sudden lack of distance between us. He smiled softly. I've got you. Always. The afternoon stretched on, and with every shared task, every glance, the bond tightened. It wasn't a dramatic romance, it was the slow, steady building of trust. I was learning that I could still trust, still feel, still embrace intimacy. By late afternoon, we sat on the edge of a retaining wall, tools beside us, tired but happy. We laughed softly about the stubborn ivy. Beneath the latter was a stillness. I don't usually do this, I said, my voice low. Let someone in like this. It's rare. Thomas looked at me thoughtfully. I know. But I'm glad we are. That statement hung in the air, a bridge between us. It wasn't about rushing. It was about acknowledging the moment. As he left that evening, I felt a new anticipation. There was no pressure, just the promise of something growing. The foundation had been laid, built on care, patience, and that rare, undeniable strength Thomas carried. The next morning, I woke with a sense of calm excitement. When Thomas arrived, he brought the same understated energy that grounded me. He placed a small bundle of wild mint and wildflowers on the patio table. I thought these might smell nice in the kitchen, he said, looking a bit shy. They're beautiful, I said, touched by the gesture. Thank you. We went back to the garden, falling into our rhythm, planting, weeding, talking. It was the comfortable silence of two people who understand each other without needing a script. Thomas's emotional strength was a constant reassurance. He didn't dominate, he supported. As we moved a heavy bag of soil together, our hands brushed again. This time I didn't pull away and neither did he. It felt natural. We had built something delicate and meaningful. As the day began to fade, we sat on the bench under the old oak tree. Thomas leaned back, wiping his brow, looking effortless even after hard work. Leaner, he said suddenly. I enjoy this. Not just the work, being here. With you. I felt a lump in my throat, the good kind. I feel the same. I haven't felt this connected in a long time. We sat in the golden light, no expectations, just presence. Later, as we packed up the tools, Thomas turned to me. Strength isn't just about lifting heavy things, he said quietly. It's about being there when it matters. About making space for someone else. I nodded, understanding him completely. That was the gift he had given me, a strength that didn't demand attention but quietly protected. I felt a deep gratitude for the lesson in trust and intimacy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violet and gold, we stood looking over the work we had done. The garden was vibrant, just like the bond between us. I'm glad we did this, I said, meeting his eyes. So am I, he replied warmly. More than I can say. We didn't need grand declarations. The shared time, the respect, the quiet moments were enough. As he drove away, I stood at the gate, feeling a profound sense of peace. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning built on trust and the quiet, undeniable bond that had grown between us. Turning back to the house, with the flowers glowing in the twilight, I realized that sometimes the simplest things, a ride to town, a shared coffee, the presence of someone steady, can change everything. With Thomas, I had discovered a strength and connection that would stay with me. It wasn't about drama, it was about being seen. And in that, I knew I had found something rare, meaningful, and truly unforgettable.